I got busy, okay? If you're wondering why I haven't done vlogs on the shows for the last 2 weeks, well, yeah, I've been working hard on the Blade reviews. I'm finishing up part 4 of 6 today. Yeah, basically, I haven't had as much time to do these as I thought I would due to a bunch of issues, most pertinently day job. So, yeah, this is actually cutting into my editing time to even do these vlogs again, which is why I missed out on doing them for half a year in the first place after Ixaid wrapped. But yeah, trying to keep back to it, and so we're covering 3 episodes of both Lupat and Build this time, starting with episode 16, Because You're a Friend, written by Naruhisa Arakawa. As I keep saying, Naruhisa Arakawa is probably the last long-running good Super Sentai writer, and yet he hasn't exactly been doing things thrillingly with Lupinranger versus Patranger, as my complaint about this series is pretty consistent at this point. The police officers keep being dumbasses instead of competent individuals, all for the glorification of the other team, even though the show should be working at an angle to eventually bring the two into some form of working relationship or camaraderie to not make them both come off as, 1, idiots, or 2, assholes, which it consistently is doing. This being an example of that when the Gangler Montan... what's the thing's name? Manta Bayarsh uses a body-swapping power to take on... Damn it, it's been so long I've actually forgetting his name now. Tuma's form, and basically go around being a dumbass. Complicated, of course, by the Patranger coming to attack the Gangler, and, well, with Tuma in its body, they would end up killing Tuma instead of the actual monster, who would still be free to go about body-swapping other things if he wanted to. This one frustrated me because it is such a simple thing to explain. Especially if it was done by civilian Lupinrangers, in that they hide out the monster, they hide out Tuma in the monster's body in the cafe, and yet pile it under a bunch of stuff and then have to pretend that, oh, nothing's there because the police think that something's suspicious, and then the Patranger don't show themselves as any type of competence in that they fall for the excuses when it is clearly a monster under a bedsheet. It's like, as I keep saying this, the way to do this is to not denigrate one side for the other. That is the only way a versus movie isn't terrible, and they keep building a series out of that very concept, in that the 3 selected for this special assignment by the global police are just that freaking bad at their jobs. Like I said weeks ago about Sakya and Tsukasa stepping up with Keiichiro absent, that they seemed more than competent on their own, but together all 3 of them seem like idiots, and this is just another example of that. And it doesn't make the Lupinranger look any better in that, yeah, they're concerned for Tuma's safety in this, that, hey, if the Patranger see it, they're going to shoot on sight, but they don't even try to explain the situation of what the hell is going on. So when they see the monster in Tuma's body appearing to shirk work and try and get with girls, he thinks he's just a scumbag player, and that reputation is never mended nor corrected. The Patranger are completely oblivious to this body-swapping thing in its entirety, and it's like, they are completely worthless to the plot now at this point, outside of their episodes, which it shouldn't be. And it's again a microcosm of the big significant problem of the show that keeps screwing it over, and I keep saying it almost every time I do a vlog on these. The Patrangers are not equal characters in this. They're there simply to make the Lupinranger look better, and because they're so awful people and how they go about things, we can't help but side with the Lupinranger in all of this. It's like, "Who Will You Cheer On" is in the theme song credits, and you can't help but cheer for the Lupinranger simply because they have the relatable backstory, they are the relatable characters for the most part, and the reason why they're being the show keeps showing the Lupinranger as the Lupinranger as the heroes and derogatory towards the Patranger is simply because they want to glorify the thief as opposed to the cops who, if memory serves, and the research I've done on this to discuss previous Super Sentai and Kamen Rider series, is that Japan has a low opinion of their police. And I'm like, well, this doesn't help that opinion. I mean, you managed to do this with Ranger without being terribly obnoxious with it. Double was more of the film noir tropes where they're focused on the private detectives and the other police weren't completely incompetent. They were, the ability of the Dopants was just beyond them. Drive was an actual police officer within the Tokyo Police Department, and while they gave reasons for why the police in that series were so subjugated to Roidmudes and how they really didn't think them exist, because it was a Roidmude influence upon the department that was incapacitating them, which, as I reasoned out, would also retroactively explain every instance of rote incompetence in previous Kamen Rider series, including all the Toshiki Inoue, well, not all of the Toshiki Inoue detective stuff, but a hell of a lot of the nepotism and corruption that would have been seen in stuff he wrote for it before, long back. But again, the Inoue thing and that him popularizing this is back to the whole thing of Inoue's work being anti-authoritarian, anti-governmental in power, in that he prefers to use protagonists that are on the outside of standard organizations. So that's not exactly the same thing. But here, it's fully playing into a cliche that's, one, not only done to death across all of their media, so it's like, what is even the fucking point? And two, these are supposed to be your heroes. So, as I keep commenting on across all of Super Sentai, is there a reason you keep making the heroes of your show be so bad at the job that you have to have someone else come in to actually do their job? I mean, this frustrates me to no end across everything Toei does when they... Because, really, it should be a situation where they get something wrong or miss something through no fault of their own. And this keeps seeming like they're missing stuff because they are the cops. And I know there are a lot of bad cops out there. I'm very aware of that. It's just, it doesn't make for good narrative that I hate half the cast. Okay, I hate one member of the cast, and that hatred spreads onto two others because of the conduct when he's in charge being reflective of what his subordinates do a lot of the time. But another good example of the Lupinranger being better characters in that is that definitely the trust scene between them, in that when they finally catch up with the monster, Manta, Tuma's willing to sacrifice his true body to finally get the Gangler to go down. So they pull not exactly a Xanatos Gambit, but definitely one of those type of clever plans to pretend to shoot Tuma's body in order to get the monster swap back to his own, thinking that he killed Tuma. And this is all one big fake out due to the team's prior planning and a weirdness and familiarity with each other that allow them to basically get it out and get Tuma back in his own, and then allow them to defeat it effortlessly. And this is always the good part of Super Sentai, in that you see these character interplays, you see these plans play themselves out with it all reassuring the camaraderie the team has and the trust in other and whatnot, and basically the show is half good. The show is consistently half good, and it was always with the Lupinranger side, and it's like, why are you including the Patranger side in this? If it's so obvious, none of the writing staff want anything to do with them. This is followed up on, in episode 17, Secret Feelings, where, stupid phone advertisements, Keiichiro has this woman who is attracted to him. Why is she attracted to him? Never explained. Why does she try and keep giving him gifts and try and follow after him only to be rejected? Never explained. Keiichiro actually acts oblivious to her affections for a long stretch of the show, to the point Umika tries to play matchmaker. And you know what the eventual reveal of this is? Keiichiro knew about her feelings all along. He just kept ignoring the woman, leaving her basically adoring of him. He lopped up the praise, but according to him, he doesn't want a relationship because he has too many responsibilities. What in any way prevented him from telling her that to let her down so she wouldn't just pine the fuck after him? That is not good contact from a person who claims to be a police officer to protect the greater good and the smiles of people, because that's not protecting someone's smile, that's keeping them in a state of stagnation physically and emotionally until that can potentially break them and make them fall to despair. You are doing the absolute opposite of what your fucking job is. At least according to what you say your fucking job is. It's absolute scumbag territory for the guy, for him to do that. Because, again, he knows. He explicitly says that he knows. He is not that oblivious, and he admits to knowing at the end of the episode. After said woman goes on an extended trip away from Japan, where she has confessed to him several times, he has acted oblivious to the entire thing, and he thinks she'll just get over it. That is not how people emotionally work. At all. She is going to linger on that until the feelings become entirely bitter and spiteful and hateful, especially if she actually finds someone else that might actually be interested in her, that she might entirely miss the opportunity because she's pining for this fuckwit that wouldn't give her the time of day or the common courtesy and empathy to actually tell her that he's not interested and has to let her down. It's like, what is wrong with that? What is wrong with you in that what you keep saying you are completely hypocritical towards? Yeah, this specific episode, by the way, has a monster that specializes in putting people in dreams and like letting them have their perfect dream to keep them sleeping in dreamland. Now, I'll give it this, it's still better than fucking Keiichiro, where it actually plays into the thing of giving someone's desires is actually dangerous, and dreams, if abused, are so beyond destructive. Whereas Keiichiro said, if you don't get your dream, you should kill yourself. Which I still will never forgive that specific show for. This isn't exactly any better when Keiichiro and Umika both get sucked into it and then have to get stuck with the dream stuff. Yeah, they both get stuck in the dream stuff, but Keiichiro, like, for some reason is immune to it, whereas Umika, I don't know, she begins to be affected by it in that she's in her school uniform so she can meet with her friend who's living again, since that is her goal at the moment, and yet she breaks free of it because, well, she knows that her friend is actually dead, so even though she's trying to revive her, that's something she can achieve in reality, whereas Tsukasa, for example, is also trapped in this, and she's completely made prone because she's surrounded by giant stuffed fluffy animals. I will give the show for being consistent in its continuity on that, but, you know, it's getting exhausting when that is the only note they really seem to play with her. And yeah, Keiichiro, even in that dream sequence, just acts not exactly oblivious, but he just pretty much ignores all of that so he can just shoot out the dream space. And, you know, Umika and the Lupinranger try to take over fighting the mech for the Power Ranger, but Keiichiro explicitly insists on doing it himself, destroying the monster, and making it so that he would not have the time to go to the woman who's attracted to him and let her down. He definitely chooses the job before anything else, even though, you know, they're explicitly offering to destroy the monster. There is no difference between one team or the other just destroying the monster. Hell, Good Striker has on multiple occasions, you know, preempted who fights what, and it's not been a significant issue aside from Keiichiro's own arrogance about wanting the credit, wanting to bring respect to the global police, and yet his conduct is always showing why they're undeserving of that respect. And as much as I hate the degradation of the team that just seems to perpetuate the cycle, you just, once again, can't help but see why they're so dismissed and denigrated, while the populace vastly prefers the Lupinranger as heroes. Because they, even though they cause more destruction, they actually seem to freaking care about more than just their reputation. I'm probably misremembering a few details. It's been a bit since I watched the episode. Which brings us to number 18, The Secret of the Collection. The Patranger are annoyed that Good Striker keeps helping out the Lupinranger, because originally it was sent for their use, and yet Good Striker is helping both sides. So they plan to steal Good Striker and subjugate him so it won't help the Lupinranger anymore. This has so many ethical and moral issues attached to it, since Good Striker is a being that possesses free will, so you are enslaving a sentient entity just to be used as nothing more than weapon fodder, and oh my god, do you not actually have any freaking self-awareness on this? Especially since Good Striker, when they, this all comes about because the Black Sheep monster, from several episodes ago, the one that originally died when it was crushed underfoot by the Patranger very early in the show, which they then found the remains for and collected, got revived by Gauche and Destra, putting a new, Lupin collection item in it, and basically making it grow giant as part of a experiment by Destra. So when they call up Good Striker to fight it, Good Striker recognizes the Lupin collection piece in it and pretty much bails from battle, and he only bails him from battle because the Patranger completely ignore every single thing it has to say about the Lupin collection piece being in it, and they keep fighting it. So it is their own fault that they get ejected from the mech, and the Lupinranger have to take over, and they are completely fucking oblivious to this, because they don't listen to anyone but themselves. And this is, again, what I'm calling back to. The Patranger consistently are terrible like this, but it is to the purpose of propping up the Lupinranger as these empathetic and relatable individuals who seem to cherish the world around them simply because of the impact of what they personally lost. But it's working against the show because they don't really give this to the Patranger. Anytime they do something which is meant to be expansionary on the cast to make them, as an entire unit, seem workable, seem something worthy of praise, it backfires due to them doing things like this consistently, where you actually start thinking about what they're actually doing amidst all of this, and you realize they're not actually good people. They're not actually being good to others in this. They're just concerned about their own whims and views. And again, I only take this extremely hostile negative point to this because they are trying to enslave a sentient being simply so they can use it as a weapon for police duty and bringing law and order. That is amazingly totalitarian and authoritarian, which is just, no. Hells to the no, that is not protecting the public good. You know, it's again, emotional manipulation as well, because on the Lupinranger side, they're annoyed that Good Striker keeps helping the police because it keeps having good feelings, because it's in its nature to try and help people. And even more than that, the reason why Good Striker bailed on Patranger is because it's found a Lupin collection piece inside of the monster, and as is revealed in this episode, Good Striker was the first Lupin collection piece modified by Arsene Lupin for human use. Apparently, all of the Lupin collection are actually artifacts from the Gangler's home world, wherever that is supposed to be, but Arsene Lupin, through unknown means, modified them, made them sentient. So, okay, this is a problem with the narrative in that these were things originally collected and owned by the original Arsene Lupin that were then stolen by the Gangler, and then like I said earlier about the Lupinranger, they're pretty much the recovery team for things that are his. And, okay, expansion on where these things originate from. That's good. They're not just magical artifacts from a magical thief. On the other hand, this is pretty much backhanded information about the origins of these things, especially since the Gangler were said to not be the original owners. So, were they originally stolen from their planet, but were stolen by them and then Lupin reclaimed them? Or did Lupin steal it from their planet to begin with? Because before this detail, the idea was that these were all things Lupin collected over the course of his career that were endowed with magical powers, which he used to keep out of anyone's hands, and that the Gangler just stole from his vaults on some type of raid. But now to make them from their homeworld? Well, now we have the problem of how most of them are based upon Super Sentai collectibles, and then asking the question of why does their homeworld seem to be such huge Super Sentai fans? This is so problematic, it's like I don't even know where to begin with this. Because you could have kept them as earthly magical artifacts endowed with the spirit of the earth, but now all of these weapons are completely alien in origin, and again, not a credit to the show. But to its credit, where's the direct... Yeah. This episode was written by Kaori Kaneko, who I do not believe has been a writer on the show before, and I would check, but the Fandom Wiki's mobile version is so freaking unusable because of all the freaking adware on it. I swear, the Fandom app main server just keeps getting worse and worse on that. But yeah, not a regular writer at all. So this detail might end up getting expunged later with more developments in the event that the main writer actually comes back to the show again, which they haven't in quite some time. Naruhisa Arakawa has been a sub-in, unless they completely ejected Junko Komuro from the writing staff, which I'm not paying attention to this. No one's reporting on this, so I would not actively know. So, can't even guess on that. But yeah, back to the point. Good Striker is the big brother to all the Lupin collection pieces, and Lupin himself charged it with looking after and protecting them from harm. It obviously failed when all of them were stolen or sealed away, but it's not going to... It's with the Lupinranger in not wanting to let any of them be destroyed. Thus, the question, why does he keep helping the police when he knows that they are actively trying to destroy them, or not actively trying to destroy them, actively just trying to destroy the monsters without any care to what might happen to the Lupin collection pieces? It's like, it's a contradiction in desires, and the only excuse for it is, I've got a good feeling about them. That is not in any way enough to continue to act as he has. And now that that is part of canon, that is a continuing dichotomy that is going to come up with the character, and of course, nothing comes of this. There is no real revelation beyond, you know, Kairi continuing the Lupinranger's stretch of being good characters by seeing the stress this puts Good Striker under, and tries to say he understands that he can't help his personal nature, and I'm like, yes you can. Super Sentai used to be about personal journeys, personal character growth, developments and whatnot, and if it is a sentient being, which this episode and prior content most certainly shows, there has to be a lesson that the characters learn to advance and develop, as that's how character arcs work. That is how characters are supposed to act. All of their experiences grow to come to more define them. Super Sentai has been terrible about this for several years, and yet these... Okay, not this specific episode, but usually that is how these things are supposed to go. That is how they have gone in previous Super Sentai series. That is usually what the best Sentai series do. Why have you not been understanding this for several years? This one got really damn frustrating. In fact, I've been watching these with my roommates lately, and the one newer to Super Sentai, he's basically seen my reviews and a bunch of other random stuff, but he basically says he's not going to bother with the show anymore when we watch it because he can't stand how unlikable everybody is and how it's, it keeps shooting itself in the foot just to continue this dumb separation, which, as I keep calling out, is in and of itself dumb, because there is no mutual respect found between each of them. There really isn't when you actually think about this. And honestly, I'm 20 episodes in. I'm doubtful that when the 6th Ranger comes in, like, the next 2 episodes, because his debut was slotted for episode 20, that he's actually going to fix this massive divide. If anything, they'll likely just start or end up ignoring it if they actually bring the two teams together, but I doubt that's actually going to end up taking place. And the frustrating thing about this is, you saw them building that mutual respect between the two teams in early episodes, and yet that seems to have been completely forgotten for quite some time, and it's ultimately proved itself detrimental to the show. So yeah, there are good things in these episodes, but it's still bogged down by what they keep fucking up. On to Build. Build, the last 3 episodes, have been part of the Sento Kiryu is Lost arc that started with him being possessed by Evolt after getting Ryuga out of there after docking one of the Pandora panels into the build driver after converting it, and apparently with it all containing at the same time the essence of all 60 full bottles, which was not a clear detail at all in any of the subtitle releases of the series, and in fact I had to find that detail out on the wiki about this panel conversion. But yeah, after the Sento is possessed by Evolt in episode 37, and it's up to Ryuga and everyone else to try and get him back. Problem is, Ryuga has lost his Evolt genes, so he can't transform because his hazard level has dropped so low. Or rather, he... Actually, I should rephrase. It's not exactly clear what the hell is going on with Ryuga's power, but I think what they're trying to say is that Evolt, when it took back his genes, pulled out all the hazard level potential of him so his transformations wouldn't work anymore. This ends up being definitely problematic for a number of reasons, but the foremost is that Gentoku does not have the ability to give him back a hazard level so he can fight. His awareness of the Faustian organization's process of converting people with, injecting people with nebula gas to give them a hazard level was procedural at best. He actually didn't have a hands-on involvement in Faust in that regard. He was mostly just administrative. When they asked him about his previous place in the science division, he was apparently just there in an administrative role due to his prior Pandora Light box corruption, and got there because his dad has connections and he's his father's son. Not that his father specifically got him that position, but being the Prime Minister's son allowed him to grease the wheels to get him in there. Some subs say that's nepotism on that part, but nepotism is controlling everything as a means of totalitarian rule and corruption, which is against the actual character of his father's actions, in that that is not something he would have ever approved of, that is not something he ever did. Gentoku, on his own, got himself that position. Yeah. I need to double-check the Rogue miniseries, but that's the impetus I got from that where Gentoku got himself there, using all of these other things in the obsessive ambition kind of way that we'd also seen with other characters affected by the light. But regardless, he can't do... Gentoku can't do anything to give Ryuga back his hazard level. So they're down to 2 riders trying to stop Evolt from finally being able to bring the hazard trigger online. Not the hazard trigger, the Evolve trigger online. The reason he can't do it in Sento's body now is because apparently his personal hazard level is so out of whack now, because Sento's hazard level went beyond 6, whereas Gentoku needed a hazard level of around 5 for it to work, because he needed to synchronize the two, and since he's out of sync, he now needs to raise the hazard level of the Evolve trigger, which can only be done through battle and absorbing the power of the other riders, so he draws them into battle to do so. He wins, or at least he gets this goal to finally become complete again. But before he does that, amidst this battle, where he also demands they recover the Pandora's box, or he'll just delete Sento Kiryu's memory entirely to make him a blank slate for Evolt's personal use. So yeah, they bring him the Pandora's box so he wouldn't do that. But Ryuga in this sees at an opportune moment that the Dragon Evolve bottle that Evolve made from his body is on his belt. So he basically steals that back, and then does his usual thing of shake it, open it, and then punch with it, and that pretty much restores his personal hazard level, and giving him the new Great Cross-Sea Dragon form. It is on the same battle tier level of Cross-Sea Charge. It is pathetic in comparison to Cross-Sea Magma. Why does this form exist? This is my consistent critique of this. Why does this form exist? It adds absolutely nothing to the show, and in fact, you could have just used that Evolve bottle in the original Cross-Sea Dragon and just made him access his normal Cross-Sea Dragon form, aka the one they had to kit bash into this new form to remove it completely from the stockpile, apparently, because, you know, they only have so many suits, and this one was not intended for the narrative in the first place. Bandai shoved it in. But what purpose does introducing a form this weak now serve, considering the only one who has battle capability in the only form that's capable of matching with Evolt right now is Cross Sea Dragon Magma. And spoilers, after restoring his ability to transform, he instantly goes Cross Sea Dragon Magma. So, the purpose this form serves is what? It serves no purpose. It serves absolutely no purpose other than to sell another toy. And you know why that's a problem? Nearly every episode of Build introduces a new form, toy, or power-up. Is like, we are at severe arc fatigue with Build because of it pulling this stuff. We seriously don't care about the toyetic items anymore because they've introduced new ones every episode. Some new form, some new gimmick, some new... It is the absolute laziest that Toei and Bandai have ever been on this in insisting that. And it is primarily because this is seriously the largest toy line they have ever done for Kamen Rider. I mean, okay, they did the cards for Decade, and card games can amass a lot of things, but they're ridiculously cheap to print. You can blister pack them, you can pack them with other items. There are ways to make them cheap to get. The items themselves are not expensive. Build has been selling almost all the full bottles in sets of 2 for about $20 each. There are 60 of the damn things, each of them costing about $10. Gashapon ones, of course, are cheaper, but by merchandise allotment, we have hit merchandising overload here, beyond any other Rider series. I mean, okay, Fours had all of the cosmic switches. There were about 45, I want to say, of those by the end, not including the Zodiarch ones, but they were even cheaper than this. Those blister packs were about $5 to $10 for 2 to 4, and some of them were packaged with weapons, whereas these are all, the full bottles are all packaged in those sets of 2 or just individually, and it's the way Force used the switches is that they were utilities. They would be introduced in batches, and because they weren't full form power-ups, they were just add-on sticky items. They were cheap to make, cheap to produce, easy for the production crew to bring in and take out as the battle needed, whereas you need to do all this more stuff for form changes or special effects for the weapon, for the ability effects that are vastly different and more expensive to use, and with the amount of them, they are not advertised well. Great Cross Sea Dragon is a perfect exemplar of that, in how there was no real need for it to be here. It was just shoved in. Most of the full bottles have acted in the same regard, because once Build passed having 10 base forms through the bottles, and then went beyond that, even after getting the Sparkling and Hazard, it's like these things don't have a point anymore. And the narrative showed that as well, with how Build stopped using them when he got control of Hazard, and now they're out of the narrative now because, at least from the hero's side's perspective, because Evil has them all now. So, what is even the point of them in the long term to fight over them if they're so interchangeable and meaningless? So what is the toy advertisement? Why do you keep shoving in the toy advertisement when you make them each individual one seem not worth the effort of collecting? Yeah, and basically what I keep coming back to is Great Cross Sea Dragon is worthless. Absolutely worthless, and yet, to its credit, it shows up in the next several episodes. They don't just throw it off to the side, but in hindsight, that actually makes things worse, as now it asks the question of, why is Ryuka using this form when why is he using this form when Cross Sea Dragon Magma is almost twice as strong as it, and he needs that battle ability of Cross Sea Dragon Magma to actually be able to even have a chance against Evolt when using the, I kept saying Great Cross Sea Dragon Magma, didn't I? Why does it keep not using Cross Sea Dragon Magma and using Great Cross Sea Dragon when he is fully aware that he stands no chance against Evolt that way? And we see that in the next episode as, well, the Gear Engine brothers, yeah, they get curb stomped so hard into the ground because of everyone being unable to do anything against Evolt because they're not using their most powerful forms and abilities, that he basically just kills them with one punch. Or at least the equivalent to one punch, and making the battle even more of a gigantic curb stomp when it doesn't feel like it should be that way. Since, if they're using all of their full power abilities, he shouldn't be able to do that. And yet it's written that way simply to make Evolt all the more menacing when we intellectually know that they're not putting their best foot forward and actually fighting him, which they should be. It's like, I'm forgetting what this specific trope name for this, but it's basically the Aizen problem from Bleach, in that he keeps getting away with shit because, oh, he's this big master planner, but the problem with showcasing that is that the reason he actually got away with it is because the heroes were not actually putting their A game up against him in any respect. That's how he kept getting away with things. In fact, that's how a bunch of villains in a bunch of shonen series do get away with things. And Kamen Rider is usually above that, and the reason why the villains win is because they actually outsmarted the heroes instead of, the heroes being stupid and not doing the all-out offensive against him. Though, to its credit, in episode 37, the heroes do try the all-out offensive to recover Sento from him, and all that results in that is him fully empowering the Evolve trigger when he puts it up in front of their rider kicks. But that's different, as that is the villain taking advantage of an opportunity versus the villain winning because the heroes didn't fully commit to battling him when they had no reason not to. But yeah, end of episode 36. They managed to recover Sento's body after Evolve gives it up after he completes the Evolve trigger and is allowed to reassume his true form of Evolve's black hole. But in doing this, Sento's memory is still chop suey, and Takumi Katsuragi, the original demon mad scientist that was once Sento, yeah, he's back. And even though it was established that most of his conduct was due to the influence of the Pandora Box's light, he still acts like a dick that doesn't actually care about anyone else around him, and his big modus operandi is science. Science is the only thing that matters. Yeah, he is completely lacking in empathy. I mean, I know that's what the show was going for, because we want Sento back and not Katsuragi, so there has to be this one big flaw. But the problem with that is that his big motivation now, as it's revealed for creating the build driver, was to stop Evolt. He was aware of his father's research and the danger of Evolt, but Evolt killed him, so his plan was to create the build driver, make the full bottles, and used a lot of them to stop Evolt, that he just didn't realize Blood Stark was Evolt in the first place, or actually, rephrase it, he might have actually known, but he was trying to bide his time until he had the ability to do something. But yeah, he was trying to he did a bunch of terrible things, especially towards Miss Sora and using the power of Banage to purify the bottles, towards the end of stopping Evolt solely. And then Gentoku tried to take his creation, turn into a war machine when he didn't know any better. And Evolt used his inventions to perpetuate this war, and basically Katsuragi is decidedly pissed on what has been done with his legacy and all the harm it's done, and he's pretty much pissed, and I can't exactly fault him in that, but the way they depict things is not, I can't trust anyone because I've been betrayed by everyone I trusted, and more, I don't trust anyone because science is the only truth. I don't understand people, and from what we saw of Katsuragi, from his mother's perspective, that wasn't true. And from the Pandora Box Light stuff, we could understand that before it might have just been a twisted personal viewpoint that when he got a hazard level of his own to use the build driver, he just woke up from, but neither are reflected quite in this. He's the full-on, I don't care about anything but science kind of guy, which definitely makes us want Sento back, but again, is not a credit to the guy. They were trying to acquit of prior wrongdoing throughout this entire thing in how he's devastated at the loss of life that his creation's misuse caused. So he cares about the damage that his creations did, but don't care about the loss of life, don't actually care about the people around him. That is a dichotomy that is a problem with this character depiction. But again, it's all in purpose of getting Sento back, and not quite on board with the whole thing entirely. I mean, it would be different if Takumi was more recognizing of, I'm not Sento, but I can be just as good, and just failing because he's a different person with different personal motivations, but that's honestly not how that comes off, unfortunately. It's more just arrogant pride instead of that, ego being a character flaw. He is the ego triumphant, and not actually caring about others, and in fact making plans to kill Ryuga simply because he still shares Evolt's genes and thinks that he will turn into another Evolt removed of any type of empathy and emotion because, again, he doesn't understand humans, even though he is human. I mean, there's a point where I could see that he's just so invested in science that he's socially awkward and not open to people. I get that side, but that's really not how he comes off as in this at all. So, how do I phrase this? He's an antisocial dick. Does that work for everybody and how I'm trying to relate this? Yeah. But to my growing frustration of this, Evolts, while everybody else is trying to get Sento back, decides that, you know what? He likes this planet. He's going to take it over instead of destroying it. And he does so by giving an ultimatum to Nanba in that he's going to rule Japan instead of Nanba, and Nanba can just be the figurehead. Nanba is not happy at this. Evolt doesn't care. Nanba sends all his forces after Evolt. Evolt kills all of them, bar Utsumi, and then kills Nanba himself. So, you just wiped from the board the representative of capitalism. I actually kind of like this, because, okay, Nanba is much like crony capitalism with regards to how it takes advantage of everyone and everything, government, civilians, researchers, for their own ends to amass power and wealth. And usually by backstabbing all of them with how it goes about doing these things. Overpricing things, instituting combat. They were basically war profiteering simply because they were the behind-the-scenes true runners of the Sento government with their economic policy. So that all works. In fact, it works all the more in that the people that they thought they were manipulating and had under thumb to give them all their power actually have all the power, in that when they stop kowtowing to them, they can overthrow and in fact subjugate this seeming power. So Evolt, by killing Namba, shows just how little actual power the man had, and his shoutings and demands and orders just meant nothing, as he didn't actually have the loyalty of his men, even though he had enslaved and brainwashed so many of them into his service. Especially Utsumi, who was one of the Namba children that had this indoctrination happen. And yet, consistently, the second they get actual human connections, or someone shows the slightest bit of kindness to them, the cult completely collapses, because servitude to one force, one individual, one being, is unsustainable if that being or entity has no actual care to their value of life and liberty. And ironically, this, my god, was Namba a metaphor for Donald Trump and the coming end that is going to be the clusterfuck of the, politics side of America for quite some time. It is really that damn comparable. But yeah, that's definitely a good aspect of this, and both a bad aspect. Because now, Namba was worthless to the story. Like, completely worthless to the story. You could have had the Sento Prime Minister do all the things Namba did, and you would have changed the story in no regard. Namba did not actually really matter to the story when you think about it, so a bunch of the things he did, it's like, okay, it's standard part of Evolt's, modus operandi to manipulate and then tear down the people he uses, with them all being idiots about it because they're getting what they want at the end of the day. But this one feels both appropriate and shows how much, like, shouldn't this have been the end boss villain of the series and not just the alien guy? I mean, the alien guy could backstab all he freaking wants, but it doesn't address the bigger problem of how the country was mainly divided by political and military powers, by which are all dead now. So, in the aftermath of the series, there should be no problems with reunification. And yet we know from the trailers for Build's tie-in movie that those boundaries still exist artificially and enforced by the government. So what's the path there then? Since all that's dead now. But yeah, Evolt's going to be the final villain with his takeover attempt, and Utsumi joins him as Mad Rogue, taking the Bat and Engine bottles and another Evolve driver that literally comes out of nowhere, and the show even mentions that it comes out of nowhere, and there is no explanation to where it comes from. And my guess for this is that it's a defective prototype for a rebuild of it that Evolve just had around and gave to Utsumi so he could be his disposable pawn. That totally fits with Evolve's character, but not quite why Evolve offered Utsumi this opportunity. Apparently, he saved Utsumi earlier in the series, back when he pretended to be Night Rogue, and Good Toku betrayed him to shoot him to assuage suspicion from Good Toku itself. Well, apparently that was another psychological break for Utsumi from his Namba training or indoctrination, simply because of what I said before. Namba didn't actually care about his subordinates, just that they did his will. Evolt actually seemed to care about him as an individual because he was interesting and appreciative of him, and Evolt could continue to use him in his own regard. But Evolt saw value in him as more than just a pawn, actually seemed to care about him. Whether that was true or false is yet to be seen. I'm betting it's just another Evolt just sees him as another toy for his amusement from how he responds. Ha ha ha, humans are so amusing. I like this planet. Yeah, that's basically how he went when Utsumi decided to join him full on. But the way Utsumi describes why he does it is that he was not wrong in choosing the sides he wanted, or choosing the power of science in the way he's gone about it. And it's an interesting contrast against both Sento and Takumi, whereas Utsumi sees science and technology as powers in their own right. Power for the sake of being power that can shape the world. And those who have power can control things. So since he has invented so much, he is seen as finally being able to grasp the power that was seen as so beyond humanity, because the Evolt driver is beyond humanity. Evolt is beyond humanity. By mimicking Evolt and his powers, humanity can advance and grow and become better. Whereas Sento and Takumi see science as a means to an end, for a betterment of others through learning more about the universe, through developing things, through... It's not about power, it's about purpose. Do you have a purpose? Whereas, back to Utsumi, his purpose is creating forms of power, science as... Okay, there was another way I phrased this, especially in comparison to how Mad Rogue and Build transform, whereas Build's forms are all very structured in that they are developed so they have a greater room to grow and develop safely, so there can potentially be many safe users of the system. In fact, that was one of the things Sento emphasized with regards to why the Build driver was superior to the Splash driver, because while the Splash driver gave a user more powerful, it was more dangerous and harmful to them, whereas Build, if you had a stable hazard level at level 3, you could just use it automatically. Whereas Utsumi is instantly given his power, but it's chaotic and destructive. It's so much immense ability, but it's so dangerous that it could easily end up backfiring them. But it's of the mindset of, we don't care if it works, we don't care how dangerous or harmful it is, as long as it gives us this ability, without regards to anyone else around them. And that is a perfect dichotomy you should have between a villain and a hero. The problem is, we kind of got the same kind of perspective from Takumi earlier, and how he doesn't really care about anyone around him. So why does he have this perspective on how science is used when his personal perspective on other sentient beings is pretty much the same as the villain? And in fact, episode 39, which finally has them facing off against Mad Rogue, actually sees that come into play in how Takumi comes to realize that he is the wrong person fighting this war, because Utsumi is the dark reflection of what he himself believes. He doesn't believe in anyone. He has nothing to believe in. He doesn't believe in anyone. The people who believed in him are gone, or so changed that they're not in alignment anymore. In fact, he is actively apologized to from Gintoku for taking his weapons and using them for petty squabbles and conflict. And it's actually what leads to Sento coming back, because he realizes he is the wrong person to be involved in any of this. Specifically with Banjo. He is planning to kill Banjo, and yet Ryuga comes in and defends him and saves him and gets the crap beaten out of it before that. And I think that is the most decisive factor in why Takumi lets Sento come back, because he realizes he is not as good a man as the one who supplanted him. So through how they reflect all of this, it's more like a... How do I phrase this? Takumi lets Sento come back and subsume him in personality. they fuse as the same person, so they have the memories and experiences of both of them together, but because Sento is the better person, Takumi lets himself not lose control because it's still himself, but let that personality, let that person be dominant in this because he can better utilize all of this. He can be the one, phrase on the opening theme, he can be the one to make that dream of how science should be used a reality because he's not fighting to destroy or kill, he's fighting to protect people. He has a purpose that Takumi was lacking, and that finally allows them to bring online the Genius Full Bottle, which... Okay, Genius form. White, primarily, which, hey, all colors combined make white, technically. The reason why pigments do it is because pigments have this conflicted color, but yeah, white is inclusive to all colors, it contains all colors within it, and then all the full bottles are docked all over his body, because their essences are all stored in the Genius Full Bottle, and they just sublimate by type into their own full bottles. So, he is powered by all 60 full bottles in the same way the Evolve trigger is. We don't have a stat line, but what frustrates me about this is the form debuts just as the episode is ending. Now, in Marathon Watch of the series, this is not a problem. In watching the series together, watching the series as it releases, that is more a problem because you have this big build-up to the form debuting, and then you shove it into the next episode. Usually that shows that the suit was not ready for this, which I would totally believe with how Build has shoved all of its power-ups into it this badly. But, okay, as an additional addendum to that, whenever a form debuts in an episode at the BDN and then gets a to be continued, it's not considered a good form debut. We had this more recently with Ghost Damashi in how its actual debut battle kept getting subverted, but at least that one has the explanation in that the suit was not ready for the debut episode because of Amazons. We haven't had a show that really pulled this kind of thing with a final form since I think it was Faiz, where the debut battle did not take place in the episode where it was first introduced. In fact, it was the beginning of the next one. But at least to Faiz's credit, it had a... Actually, Faiz is a good comparison piece for this, in that it kind of had the same kind of character arc for Takumi and Nui, in how he was going through a despair arc after the revelation that he was the wolf Orphanok came about, and basically having to find himself again. So, but that was over several episodes, and more defined than just the two we've had with Takumi in contrast to Sento. We want Sento back immediately, but it feels like you could have compressed a few things in a previous episode and gotten that all out properly. Admittedly, all three of these episodes had that problem where the new thing debuted just the episode was ending, and we didn't actually have an idea of its impact until the next episode. First was with Evolt's Black Hole form, then it's with the Mad Rogue debut, where the battle where it was a monstrous thing didn't show up into the next episode, and now Genius form is that same type of continue plot. And, like I said, it's not good writing when you do that over and over again. You can do it once or twice for the dramatic impact of something powerful happening. In fact, Mad Rogue was probably the perfect example of how you do that, but 3 times in a row, and I think they might have done it once or twice earlier, you can't really keep pulling that without people starting to get annoyed in how you're intentionally sequel baiting, because it's the next episode. You have to now watch the next episode for this thing. And I use the phrase sequel baiting as this is the biggest phenomena of it, in that it's a hanging plot thread to make you go watch the next thing, even though the next thing might not actually follow up on that appropriately. And it drives people crazy. It drives people constantly crazy. And it's the biggest criticism of movies that want a sequel. No, don't try and sequel bait to continue the story. Tell a functioning story in your own narrative, and if we like that movie in and of itself, then we can be more appreciative to a sequel. Do not intentionally sequel bait with, as you're not always going to have a narrative that is going to follow appropriately from that. Like, you can have a hanging plot thread that will lead into the next thing, but don't, like, do it with intent of, oh, we'll just run this off to next time. Because not everything is going to work well that way. Not everything is going to follow up on that correctly, despite the divide, and even the same series writer coming in on that. It's frustrating when you constantly use it. You can't constantly use it. And I am so suffering from arc fatigue from this, and I am not alone in this, as, well, there was a thing on social media about a week or two ago where some of the more recent ratings and sales numbers for Toei's blocks got out, and right now, Lupinranger vs. Patranger, which is consistently frustrating and anger-inducing, at least by my perspective and those that are watching with me, and how I keep hearing the feelings of the show play out right now, it's like, it's very frustrated with the status quo there, and yet they are outrating Build. Build has the much better storytelling, but we are all suffering from arc fatigue and the issues of the show not being addressed, or addressed in very poor ways that are not credits to the show, as it keeps ignoring that they are there. Lupinranger vs. Patranger has the exact same problem in not fixing its problems, but I think the reason why is, even if it has the worst problems, there is at least something different each episode. We have been stuck in long, extensively drawn-out arcs in Build since episode 16. Episode 40 is debuting this week. So, without the downtime, and, okay, between episode 16 and episode 39, there are technically two different significant arcs. The three countries warring arc, and then the Volt arc, but it's something that never seems to end. It's just not exactly a repetition, but an ongoing narrative which you think could have wrapped more simply or had an easier dividing point between them. Instead, no, we don't have any downtime between these arcs. They just keep building on each other in small pieces, injected with fight scenes. It's in essence the Ghost problem, but the Ghost problem was that they injected worthless Monster of the Week, Character of the Week plots in a narrative where those were unneeded and wanted, and subjugated the ability to in any way focus on the larger arc, whereas here, the larger arc is subsuming to everything else that we had. Basically, no one but the regulars is even appearing in the show anymore. So there's less and less scope, lore, and world building, which made the early side of the show so interesting and enjoyable. Those plots are pretty much gone with, and there's a loss of setting and appeal, as it just seems like it's the same thing over and over again. Evolt wants more power. Evolt gets more power. The team trains in either hazard, raising their hazard level, or Sento making a new device, or some full bottle is used differently in the show to try and give them an edge. And it's been like that for some time now, and it's becoming less and less interesting and appealing. Even if the greater picture might pan this all out, it's been way too extended, way too drawn out. And again, this is part of the problem of why dragging out Genius's debut into Phi's levels of lateness was such a problem. If you debut Genius earlier, you let Evolt have his smackdown in his phase 1, 2, or 3 forms, and then get him black hole form later, that's interesting because you have the heroes score a tangible win against him, and then he has to reorganize his plans and figure out his better scheming to actually get what he's after. Instead here, the villain has everything. The villain has already won, and it should be interesting. It should be interesting for us to see the main heroes try and overcome this, but it's not, because the villain has won throughout the show without any actual real setback. Even Sento changing a Pandora panel into his new power-up and trying to blow himself up with Evolt alongside him and try and subvert Evolt's plan, which would have been a good moment for the show, ended up not working in hindsight, so it's, like, meaningless anyways, beyond, okay, it services the story in getting Katsuragi back to finally address him, but in the grand scheme, it feels less important as it's just another scene of Evolt winning. You can't have the villain win all the time like this. You need to bring something different to chop it up, like Exade, for example. Kronos was the big bad for about 15 episodes of the show, the final arc of the show. It stayed interesting because the characters, either Kronos himself or the characters fighting Kronos, did something different in each episode. In the early episodes of the Kronos arc, it was trying different, distinct ways to fight Kronos. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. Some of them were subverted by Kronos' own actions or intelligence, but it broke it up so that each piece did something new for the arc and didn't unnecessarily echo themselves. After they got Muteki, then it was Kronos who was on the defensive, trying to find a way to stop Muteki, that kept failing because of all this other stuff built upon throughout the series beforehand. Getting on the line with Kyria, the crisis with Brave and his girlfriend, and how he can only use that as a empty leash for so long before he would fight against him. Using his ability to manipulate the game data to turn game days to his side, and all that. It did something different each time, whereas here, it just feels more of the same that the show has been giving us for the last 20 episodes, and I really feel that is the arc fatigue that has resulted in such a huge, for Kamen Rider, viewership drop. Because they're shoving out the toys, but they're not balancing all this other stuff for good narrative construction. Because if you're just going to keep giving us the same thing over and over again, with exception to what power-ups get used, then why do people want to keep watching? Yeah. I'm not sure how many people have actually come to this realization, but it's something that's been percolating in the back of my mind for a while now, and how the use of forms and power-ups are really the biggest detriment to it, and it's an example of Toei strangling out everything else just for the toyetic merchandising stuff. And usually the over-merchandization has not been as big a detriment in Kamen Rider's development as it has been, say, the Super Sentai series the last few years. But I can't help but say that it is a problem here, and it's not been for Lupinranger vs. Patranger, where they are trying to collect some new trinket every week. So that's actually surprising, in that with regards to viewership interest and what makes things interesting, Build, the more serialized, has a message narrative, is faltering against a show that does silly antics that are different every week, simply because the silly show, with different antics every week, shifts up the status, not exactly shifts up the status quo, but is allowed to play more with the status quo. That's all I got for this week, so I'm gonna go. Later, guys.